Okay, this is part 2 of the second lecture in criminology. Continuing on. Okay, in this section, I want to just give you some structure as you read through the various theories to help you organize them more easily. Please don't mistake this very brief sketch of the theories as enough to understand them. All I'm doing here is setting the stage and pointing to issues and ideas you should be thinking about as you read more about the specific theories. One idea, not exactly a formal theory but often called one, is deterrence. Deterrence is the idea that you can control crime through the threat of punishment, and that people will always weigh the pros and cons of any situation and then pursue maximum gain or pleasure and avoid painful experiences. So then all you need to do is create laws that punish people harshly if they engage in a certain behavior, and if that doesn't work, punish them more harshly. You are already familiar with this idea because it's the driving force behind our current criminal justice system. This is getting tough on crime, quote unquote, and, quote, 3 strikes and you're out, and, quote, 0 tolerance policies, and mandatory prison sentences and the like. The logic seems solid, right? Rational people won't commit a crime if the punishment is too severe, and as you'll see, it also has to be swift and certain. As you read about this theory, understand its merits. Rational people do tend to make decisions that keep them from being punished. Think about how stiffer drunk driving laws have driven down the incidence of drunk driving in America. It's worked, actually. However, not all crimes are committed by rational people, as in the case of delinquents joyriding or of a crime of passion, when a man finds his wife in bed with his best friend, for instance, or when someone is on drugs. So also understand these limitations to the idea of deterrence. It works better for some crimes than others. It isn't a theoretical strategy that should be applied blanket-wide for all crimes in every situation, but that's how we use it. You'll also read about some biological, psychological, and personality theories on crime and deviance. I'm not going to say much about this here for brevity's sake, but I will say that I want to focus on the more sociological explanations in this class, even though psychology and biology have important insights as well. Of course, biology, genes, hormones, brain patterns, and psychology, like personality development, play critical roles in criminal behavior. But biology and psychology don't occur in a vacuum. Unless you were raised by wolves and have had no meaningful contact with other human beings growing up, your attitudes, values, and beliefs, including your behaviors, both good and bad, have been shaped by your social environment. You might have a genetic disposition towards drinking, but you aren't destined to become an alcoholic. It's a mistake to compartmentalize the disciplines. The forces of biology, nature, and society, nurture, are always at work and are mutually reinforcing. So while it is certain that some aspects of our behavior are heavily influenced by biological or psychological factors, these factors all take place in the dynamic fluid of society and can only be fully understood in a social context. There are 3 other major sociological orientations involving a number of theories within each that I want to outline for you now. These are social structure theories, social process theories, and critical theories. If you think of each of the theories you'll be reading about as falling into one of these 3 general orientations, it'll make a lot more sense to you. Here's a tip. Get out a pen and paper and jot down notes on each theory as you read about them, placing each theory under one of those 3 categories: social structure, social process, or critical categories. Then think of each specific theory as belonging to one of the categories which I will now describe. This is how your textbook lays it out as well. First, social structure theories. These theories all have the common notion that crime is the result of social and economic inequality. That is to say, crime occurs because some groups suffer more economic or personal hardships than others, living in chaotic and unstable environments, and this pushes many of those disadvantaged people toward a life of crime. At some level, we are all products of our environment, and some environments are more likely to produce criminal behavior than others. In particular, these theories highlight the effects of joblessness and unemployment, poverty, and desperation or strain as often leading people toward crime. In fact, the earliest crime theory in sociology came from what we call the Chicago School, which is the University of Chicago, by the way, where criminologists first posited the theory of social disorganization. Shaw and McKay are mentioned here, and they were influenced by other ideas such as Oscar Lewis's culture of poverty and Miller's lower class culture conflict and Albert Cohen's middle class measuring rod. The implication of this perspective is clear. To alleviate crime, you must create equal chances, raise unemployment levels, or raise employment, provide economic and social opportunities, and repair dysfunctional neighborhoods. There's a link on the transcript called To the Harlem Zone that, if you watch, you'll see is a good example of a program based on social structure theories. Here's a tip. Look for the theories I mention in this lecture as you read, because these are the only ones I'll likely choose for the quiz. In fact, I've already created the quiz, and I can tell you I drew from what I'm lecturing on here. Note that the chapter section on restorative justice won't be included on this first quiz. You will be tested on restorative justice on week 4, but not right now. Okay, second, social process theories. All social process theories start with the premise that criminal behavior is learned through interaction with others. You learn to be criminal. This is a different take than with social structure theories because although they both emphasize the role of society in crime, social structure theories emphasize the larger macro forces of society, institutional forces such as economics and unequal stratification of resources, whereas social process theories emphasize what is learned within those institutions. So with social process theories, the emphasis is on socialization rather than stratification. Criminology textbooks almost always start with Edwin Sutherland, and your text is no exception. Here you'll learn about his propositional theory called differential association, in which he describes the learning process towards criminality. It's a classic theory, and it's stood the test of time, and has led to the development of other social process theories, such as Mattson-Sykes' neutralization theory and Cloward-Nolan's opportunity theory, which expand on Sutherland's notion. And my favorite, my dissertation on gender differences in delinquency was a partial test of this one, is Travis Hershey's social control theory, which isn't really about control at all, as much as about the process of developing strong pro-social ties and bonds to society through group-level interaction. Look for his discussion of drift and consider the power of a theory that starts by asking not why do people commit crime, but rather why don't people commit crime? Okay, I want to talk about the third set of theories, critical theory, the third perspective. Conflict theory, critical or conflict theory. You can describe it either way. Conflict theory is easy to understand and appreciate, but don't lose sight of the specific language used in this tradition, because I'll be looking for it in your assignments, the precise language. For conflict theory, the critical issue about crime isn't criminal behavior at all. Instead, the critical issue is how certain behaviors become criminalized and the negative effects that the criminal label has on people once marginalized by a criminal justice system that works to keep them from full participation in society. From this perspective, drawing from Karl Marx now, the question is one of power. Who has it and who doesn't? Or you might prefer the most dominant sign of power, the dollar sign, as the basis of the theory. Whether we're talking money or power, the conflict perspective is squarely rooted in the premise that crime itself is not the problem. Stop for a minute. You really got to think about that last sentence. The problem is that some groups have more power than others and will use that power to maintain their advantage, called maintaining the status quo, and will create laws and enforce those laws in ways that secure their advantage over others. And by the way, you and I were the others. This effect is particularly true in a capitalistic system where, for instance, juvenile judges are paid by private juvenile detention facilities to send kids to their facilities through kickbacks, or where group homes for runaway girls are staffed with high school dropouts, or where private prisons paid entirely by public tax dollars sit totally empty in a field in Missouri, or blah, blah, blah. You get the point. Those are all true stories. In addition, because crime is profitable to those who ultimately confine or rehabilitate the criminal, they have a vested interest in making sure there are more criminals for them to serve. It's a concept called net widening, and it's in your textbook. And from a conflict perspective, it's not hard to see why private for-profit interests, but also public entities driven by the dollar, would work to create a larger population of criminals and not to reduce crime at all. How do they do it? Well, who writes the laws that make certain behaviors criminal in the first place? Conflict theory argues that these are basically the same people. In Marxist terms, the capitalist class, or the owners of production. So the incentive is not to reduce crime, but to actually expand by criminalizing a broader range of behaviors so that their institutions can be paid to, quote-unquote, correct those individuals. Through both law and law creation and law enforcement, then, those in power can dictate what is against the law and can impose penalties on those engaging in behavior that's harmful to their interests by enforcing some laws more strictly than others. Think about why it is that in this country you can still get 10 years in prison for selling a bag of weed, but when $3 trillion was stolen from the economy in 2008 through illegal and fraudulent banking activity, nobody went to jail for a single day. For hardcore conflict theorists, then, crime can be seen as a good thing. It can be a good thing because it represents a resistance to those forces that work to control society and to exploit the population for their own power interests. And yes, we're talking about the man. I would also add that those in power, what C. Wright Mills called the power elite, use our modern media system to reinforce their status and control. As a primary socializing agent today, the media, which is largely owned by a small set of multinational corporate interests. Just about everything you see on TV is owned by about 5 corporations, by the way. These corporate interests are interested in distracting you from the reality of power and inequality in America and abroad. I call this a form of ideological control, which arguably is a stronger force keeping people in their place than the actual laws that we have. Think about how often the shows you watch on TV or even how often the websites you visit actually ask you to think about the important questions. Like, who's in power? Why are these things illegal but not those things? Who decided that? Who benefits from the law? Who profits? Instead, we get 24/7 coverage of poor urban black males being chased around their neighborhoods, and we get America's Most Wanted, Cops, To Catch a Predator, blah, blah, blah. When was the last time you saw a popular TV show like this devoted to catching old rich white men defrauding the economy? It's just not sexy enough, I guess. Most of the shows we enjoy in America are an intentional sideshow, a distraction from what we should really be thinking about. A concrete example of a program that utilizes conflict theory would be any diversionary program in which the goal is to keep offenders out of the system entirely, so as not to be subject to the authority of those in power in the first place. Such examples might include teen court or even probation. In a later section, we'll be talking about these kinds of programs as restorative justice programs, which are intended to divert others in this very same way. So this is conflict theory in the nutshell. As you read more about it, keep these critical questions in mind. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to break here. Okay, this concludes the second video lecture. You should finish engaging the materials for this week, and I'll see you again next week for the third video lecture.